Susan was at a gathering Friday night with some King Avenue people, and she was asked, "Are the stories that John tells about you true?" Her answer was yes. So there. So when I married Susan, I married into a Ukrainian family, and I married into Ukrainian history and the Ukrainian story. One of the stories that I have heard several times, it's been told to our kids repeatedly, is the story of Grandma Marco coming to the United States. Grandma Marco was born in what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in what our country eventually called Hungary, but she was Ukrainian. And she was born in the late 1890s, came to the United States alone as a young girl, young teenager, in 1915. She landed at Ellis Island and knew her brother was there, and her brother lived in Buffalo. Now, Grandma Marco, 1915, she left Europe in the middle of the First World War, and one of the jobs she had in her family was to follow the cart. Her father would pick up sticks and twigs and so on in his cart and take them to the village to sell for firewood. She would follow the cart through the forest to pick up anything that fell off the cart, and she frequently talked of being scared of wolves attacking her. So she came to our country in 1915, landed at Ellis Island, tended to go to Buffalo, and went to Buffalo to meet her brother, who was not there. Speaking no English, not literate, didn't know how to write. She was taken in by a Hungarian woman who ran a rooming house. In exchange for her room and board, she had to clean the rooming house. There was no, apparently, Ukrainian community for her, and she needed more money, so she went to work in a factory in Buffalo. She had many offers of marriage from Hungarian men, and she would not marry a Hungarian. She would marry a Ukrainian. And she met her husband-to-be, John Marco, who was injured in a mine accident in Pennsylvania and moved to Buffalo and worked in that factory. Grandma Marco married John Marco, and they had 5 children, 3 of whom survived infancy. That's a story that is told. Just another part of the Ukrainian story that I've been told is the Ukrainian history of subjugation to the Russians. And I've had to read books to become part of the story of Susan's family. I remember in the late 90s, we celebrated the millennium of Ukrainian Christianity. All the Ukrainians went to a big banquet hall where we had kielbasa and pierogies and cabbage rolls all over everything, and vodka. And I remember watching the priest with a cigarette, drinking vodka at the roulette wheel, and I thought, good Lord, there's nothing that a Methodist minister could do publicly that he's doing. Well, yeah, they were Ukrainian Byzantine Rite, yeah. So that's a story. A lot of us have stories. We like stories. Elie Wiesel says that God created human beings because God likes stories. You'd rather hear a story than you would an essay. You'd rather read a novel or read a biography, most of us, than read an economics textbook. Stories we can connect to. And a good story has elements of suffering and sacrifice and celebration and joy. It has elements of scarcity and abundance. It has, reversal where things turn out well. It has parts of generosity and community where people are connected. And a good story kind of connects the past and the present and looks forward to the future. And a good story has gratitude, where the people are grateful. That Ukrainian celebration was all the Ukrainians gathering together with their separate stories as part of one large story of celebration and abundance. The story that John told is the story of Judaism. Yeah. And it's scripted, and it's got words that are used, it's got actions in it. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess, and you settle it, you will take some of the first fruits. This is what you are to do. You're to follow this script. You will take some of the elements, put it in a basket, and take it to the priest where the Lord is dwelling. And you will say to the priest, today I give the first fruits of the land that the Lord has given me. Gratitude. Gratitude in this story. And the priest will take the basket, and you will say, a wandering Aramaean was my ancestor, and he lived as an alien in Egypt. And the people grew and became numerous, and we were oppressed and persecuted and put to hard labor. It's interesting how they change the pronouns in this story from they to we were oppressed. We become part of the story. Hundreds, thousands of years later, we have become part of that story. We were oppressed and we cried to the Lord, and the Lord delivered us with a mighty hand and brought us out to a land flowing with milk and honey. And so, when you give your gift to the priest, you will bow and place it on the altar. And then you will have a celebration, and you will include in the celebration the Levites and the aliens. That's their story. It's a story where the individual becomes part of the group. Because of gratitude, the individual is no longer an individual, but belongs to a larger group. Their suffering is no longer individual. It becomes part of a larger group, and they have a sense of support in that. Their celebration is not just their own, but they have a sense of community in that celebration. This is the second sermon in our series on gratitude, and it's on corporate gratitude. Gratitude that we share. We like our stories. What are the stories we tell that have elements of suffering and joy, of scarcity and abundance, of community where we're linked to the past and have hope for the future? Well, festivals tend to be community acts of gratitude. The pumpkin festival, the strawberry festival, the tomato festival. Part of it has the community history, and we feel like we belong in the corporate act of gratitude. Sports are corporate acts of gratitude. Let's just think of 2 years ago when the Cavs won. You know, we had a history of scarcity. We had a history of abundance, of suffering. And then a wonderful thing happened. And we won, and we told stories of what it was like to be a long-suffering Cavs fan and how great it was now to celebrate with others, and we were all connected. Someday, maybe Browns fans can do that and have that story. But think of when the Cubs won the World Series. Everybody was telling stories about their grandfather and their great-grandfather and their father, and how they used to go to Cubs games and suffer, and, you know, all the jinx and all that stuff, and Bartman, screwing up that foul ball. And almost everybody became a Cubs fan when they won the World Series. Only they had lost and the Indians had won. But sports become this corporate act of thanksgiving. And we have our stories of thanksgiving. You know, a wandering Aramaean, a lost, a straying Aramaean, a disconnected Aramaean was my ancestor. All of us can have that story. A wandering Ukrainian was my ancestor. A wandering German, a wandering Chinese person, a wandering Cuban, a wandering Mexican was my ancestor. And they came to this country, and they didn't know anybody. And they connected, and they built their life, and they had a family. And the suffering became joyful, and the scarcity became abundance, and they include people in that, and they share that. Yeah. Why don't we have more experiences of corporate gratitude? Yeah. Well, there are reasons thrown out there. One is, Jonah Goldberg talks about it in his new book, Suicide of the West, where he says, we just don't have in this country a sense of gratitude for history. We don't realize what people have done to give us the rights and benefits and things that we see as entitlements. We think we have done it all. And so we just don't have that sense of connectedness to the past, which also then destroys a sense of connectedness to each other. And then in this country, we just have a sense of individualism, where it is just me. And I can celebrate without you. I also think we have a sense of corporate guilt. I have trouble. Every Thanksgiving, I celebrate our abundance, and I celebrate with our family, but it always goes through my mind, what about the Native Americans? I think of Frederick Douglass, the speech that he wrote on the 4th of July. Powerful speech saying, it's your holiday, it's not mine. And every time I participate in a corporate act of thanksgiving, I always think of those who suffered and lost. I wonder if part of our story needs to include the act of asking forgiveness and being forgiven, and that we become part of even a larger story. and the ones who suffered become part of our story. And a sense of inclusion expands. There's corporate gratitude in the story of Christianity. Every time we take communion, we celebrate thankfulness and gratitude. We celebrate God's gift of creation. We celebrate God's gift of forgiveness. When we turned away and our love failed, your love remained steadfast. We celebrate Christ. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, ate with sinners. He healed us, feeds us, includes us in community. So make us one with Christ, one with each other, and one in ministry to all the world until Christ comes in final victory. And we feast at his heavenly banquet. We include others in Christ's story of love and forgiveness and inclusion. The King Avenue story, I love the part of it where in the 1880s they decided to start a church north of Columbus. Started in a bakery, moved here, 3 buildings on this site. This is the third. The second building burned in 1918. This building was built in 1922. The church kind of was linked to the neighborhood and grew and then declined as the neighborhood declined. And then the story of inclusion of LGBTQ persons, where the church revived and became a wonderful place to be. We're heading into a celebration season in Columbus where we have Red, White, and Boom, where we tell this corporate story and gratitude of the American story. We have ComFest, where we tell some story. But it's a story of inclusion and gratitude. And we have Pride. Pride, to me, is a story of corporate gratitude. I just love being part of the parade. I love people cheering me. I love the sense of unity. I love hearing the stories that people say, oh man, when this parade started, not many people were in it. It was fearsome. People were afraid to be in it. And we've moved from suffering to celebration and joy. We've moved from a sense of scarcity to a sense of abundance, where it's one of the largest parades in the country. We think of the King Avenue story. We think of the Pride story of gratitude and inclusion. How many of us are part of the King Avenue story and can say, I was a wandering lesbian, and I came to a church that included me in its story. I was a wandering transgender person, and I came to this church and it included me in its story. I was a wandering straight person, And I came to this church, and it included me in its story of celebration and abundance. How many of us can tell some kind of story that includes us, where we are now part of the King Avenue story of love and mercy and inclusion? I don't know how to end this sermon. And I think the way to end it is for you to think about your story and where it fits in to the corporate story of gratitude at King Avenue. May it be so.